Welcome to Arise with Christ. We share stories and truths related to the temple. Together with you, our hope is to fortify faith in Jesus Christ and experience joy in covenant keeping.
I'm Carolee Bailey, and I'm here with Angelique Plojek.
Hello. Hello, Carolee, and hello to all of our listeners, especially our new listeners. We're so happy you're here.
Yes, thank you for joining us. We are so excited to share with you the conversation that we had with Cozzens Acerson. She is an incredibly warm and gracious person. We thoroughly enjoyed spending time with her, and we think you will enjoy it too.
Cozzens Acerson was born and raised in Moab, Utah, where she was taught how to navigate life by her two wonderful, hardworking parents. Due to her outstanding service in the community, Karen received an honorary doctorate from Utah Valley University in 2022. There, she served on the board of trustees for over a decade. Karen was one of the original organizers of the Timpanogos Storytelling Festival. One of Karen's favorite contributions was mentoring youth as a 4-H leader. Karen authored 5 books, including WordPerfect, The Complete Reference, which was a New York Times bestseller. She worked as head of customer support at WordPerfect for many years. She is an internationally recognized expert in the field of word processing and skill-building techniques. Karen and her husband, Jeff, served as mission leaders in the Italy-Rome mission from 2007 to 2010. They now serve together at the Provo Missionary Training Center, where Karen is a branch missionary. Although Karen has been recognized and honored publicly for her meaningful contributions to the community, she considers her greatest accomplishment raising her 6 children. She has no greater joy than her family, which currently includes 10 grandchildren.
Karen, thank you so much for having us in your home today.
You're welcome. So glad to have you here.
We're grateful to be with you, and we're excited to hear your stories and experiences related to temples. But we want to start, and I know you might not like this, but we do want to start by asking a little bit about you.
Okay.
We know that you were honored by UVU last year, and you received an honorary doctorate. We would love to hear a little bit about the volunteer work that led to you receiving that honor.
Actually, when they asked me if they could do that, I told them no, because there were so many other people more deserving. So I love the community. I love serving the community, but I know there are a lot of people who do more. I've really enjoyed several things that I'm really proud of. One is being a 4-H leader. When I was young, that 4-H program really helped shape me into who I am. So I loved being a 4-H leader. I loved being involved with my children's schools. And so it was just natural that I was a PTA president in an elementary school at American Heritage School, and then later at Pleasant Grove High School. And thoroughly enjoyed that. There's nothing that keeps you young like being with students. And then later, I served on the board of trustees at Utah Valley University and was there for 10 to 12 years. Then they asked me to receive this honorary doctorate.
That's amazing.
I was really happy about that.
Yeah, well deserved. That's a great honor. What motivates you to be so service-oriented?
I just love people. I love being out and doing things. I remember when the kids were young, we used to try to choose a service project every week. One time I remember we took the kids out and painted over graffiti in our neighborhood. We just suddenly had graffiti pop up all over. And so we went out and painted over it. We are always just trying to make them aware of the world around us, of people and how they can help. My husband taught a principles of leadership class at UVU, and he taught the students, put away the shopping carts. Open doors for people. There's such little simple things. We don't all have to go out and do some big grandiose project in the community, just making the place we live a better place. There's a lot to be said for that. But I just love people. I love being out and serving. And I know that that's what Jesus Christ wants us to do. He wants us to be out doing good.
I know that you grew up in a small town in Moab, Utah. Will you share with us and with our listeners a little bit about your childhood and growing up in a small town, what that was like for you?
I came from a family of very hardworking parents. My dad was a civil engineer, very manly man. He could do anything. He not only worked at his projects, building roads and digging basements and things, but he would always go and help people. And I always remember that he would take his machinery down to the church welfare farm. And he had us down there working with them. We would take away the branches after they were trimmed. We would pick up things from the ground and help with the apples, picking the apples, a lot of different things that we remember doing there. There were 7 children in our family. My older sister had cerebral palsy. So it really gave us a great appreciation for our bodies and what our bodies can and sometimes can't do. My mother was the most amazing woman and still is. She's still living. She's 88 now, and she still lives in Moab. And she taught us everything. Our family did not have a lot, but she taught us how to cook and sew and garden and can our fruits and vegetables. We just worked hard, but we loved it. We had a good life. Unfortunately, when I was 13, my dad contracted encephalitis and was completely paralyzed. He was in a coma for a while. And then when he came out of that after about a month, he was completely paralyzed. My mom was surprised to find that she was expecting her 7th child at that time. It really was a very difficult time for our family. And I remember being very angry with God. I remember one time specifically in my basement, just yelling and having this very vocal conversation with him. Why did you allow this to happen? It's good to be older and look back. And it didn't take me too long to realize that God was there and he was always there. Things happen. There are sicknesses and death. Physics is at work with things that happen. We made it through. My dad finally came home. And my mother took care of him in a wheelchair. He had to learn how to speak all over again. He never did walk. He was in that wheelchair for 46 years before he passed away about 5 years ago.
Wow.
My sister lived until she was 51, and she passed away while we were on our mission. And that's quite unusual for someone with cerebral palsy to live that long. My parents took such good care of her. She just lived off of love. So we learned how to work and how to care for people. And we learned what it was like to be served. We had a lot of hard lessons. I remember my mom applying for the Social Security benefits. My dad did not have disability insurance. He had let that go just probably a month or 2 before he got sick because it was so expensive. So we were on church welfare for about a year. And that has taught me a great lesson. How to be very empathetic. I remember my mom taught me a great lesson. I was embarrassed about that. And I was taking some labels off the cans because we had to take cans of vegetables to some church activity. She said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I don't want people to know that we're on church welfare." And she said, "All right." She sat me down and talked to me about that and said, "You went and worked at the church welfare farm with Dad. You worked hard and you worked every weekend for years. So you've paid it forward at that time, and now we need this help. And when we don't need this help anymore, then you get to go serve again and bless other people's lives." And so there's not a canning assignment that I used to miss. I loved going to the cannery, and people have done so much for us that I want to pay that back.
It sounds like your parents are amazing. I love that principle of work was instilled and the helping and paying it forward was instilled in you from an early age, and how that has become such a part of your life. As I think sometimes as a mom, I forget how much the lessons I'm teaching my children right now matter so much for their futures.
You know, I've written some books, and I wrote the first one, and suddenly the editor said, "You need to do the dedication page." And I just thought, I need to dedicate this to my parents. And so I just wrote one line and said, "I dedicate this to my parents, Richard and Mary Jane Cozzens, for teaching me the value of hard work." And I've been guilty of this. I don't know that I've expected as much out of my children as I probably should have. To be able to teach them that value is so important for the rest of their lives, because I couldn't have done what I've done without learning that.
Yeah, I could see that.
I love what your mom taught you too about being a giver and a receiver, that we all have seasons of both.
Yeah.
And part of learning to follow Jesus is giving and receiving. You mentioned that you have written some books.
Yes.
Will you just tell us about the books that you've written?
I was at BYU working as a secretary, and a professor down the hall came and got me and said, you've got to see this wonderful product. This is an amazing word processor. At the time, I was on a little Apple IIe using WordStar. It was very archaic, even for that time. And he had just received a brand new IBM PC, and he had ordered a word processing program called WordPerfect. And it was from a little company in Orem. And I thought, wow, that's amazing that something this great came out of Orem. Well, one day a professor came and he needed some WordStar files transferred over to this great WordPerfect because we'd convinced him that he needed to use this. By then, I was actually taking support calls from other people who had received the product, and they knew that now I had one and I knew how to use it. So people spread the word that if you need help, call Karen over in the family history department. This one professor needed to have these files transferred over. So I called WordPerfect and said, do you have any kind of product that will do this? Well, fast forward, they offered me a job because I knew the product, and I became their 30th employee. So I worked in the customer support department. There were only 3 of us at the time. After a while, I became the head of customer support in training a lot of people who came on later, like sales reps and things. We had to train them, even how to turn on a computer at that time. So I wrote a lot of things that were just repetitive. Okay, we're going to need to teach them these things. I'll just write that because we're training a lot of people. And then after a while, they asked if I could help write the manual for WordPerfect. They needed a new manual. And so I would write pages and pages of these great features. And they'd say, no. We only want 1 page per feature. And that was very disappointing to me because there's so much in this product. And so I kind of kept all of that put aside and didn't ever get rid of it. And then there was a publisher who was looking for an author, and that was Osborne McGraw-Hill. They asked if they could see some of my writing, and I sent it to them, and they said it was great, and they hired me, and I wrote WordPerfect, the complete reference. It was a bestseller on the New York Times bestseller list. And it was a great thing. And I ended up writing 5 books, 4 for Osborne McGraw-Hill and 1 for Ziff Davis Press.
Did you study literature or technical writing?
No, but I love to read. I was that little girl who was up at 3 a.m. in her closet with the light on and stuff stuffed around the crack or a flashlight under the covers. So I read all the time. I walked to school while I was reading a book. And my mother was afraid I was going to get run over by a car. But no, I loved to read, and I did enjoy writing. WordPerfect was such a wonderful program that it sold itself. It wrote itself. It was an amazing time.
Going back to your parents a little bit and a transition from some of your accomplishments in the world to maybe how you learned to be a covenant keeper and to follow the covenant path. What did your parents do to teach you to be a covenant keeper?
You know, my parents were very strict. They made sure that we were raised the way that they thought was the right way to be raised. We always went to church. My mom and dad always served in their callings. They were very faithful, and that made a big impression on me. I still remember the pew where I was sitting when I was singing with my mom. She had a beautiful alto voice, and so I loved to sing alto with her. And I remember sitting and singing, "I Stand All Amazed." That's my favorite song still. I was 7, and I remember distinctly having that confirmation, being flooded with the Spirit that this gospel is true. And I have never questioned, ever. I was so grateful for as much as a 7-year-old could understand. I look back at that now and think, you know, 7-year-olds really can understand and 8-year-olds can understand. And I was so grateful for this atonement that my Savior did love me enough to sacrifice his life for me and for everyone. And so I was grateful for that. Church to me is joyous. It's fun. I remember one time specifically, I was tired. I'd just come home from, I think, BYU meetings. And I looked at the clock and I thought I could go over to Relief Society in my home ward. And then I was like, well, I'm kind of tired. I kind of had this little struggle with myself. And then I went to the Relief Society. And to feel the Spirit and the lessons, the things that you can learn, even after being in the church forever, just so impactful. and so uplifting and so beautiful. There's really nothing like it. I'm also a choir groupie. I love any kind of choir. I remember one time we were at a stake conference. We popped into Italy and there was a stake conference going on. This was after our mission. And I just went and stood with them and sang. I thought, who's going to kick me out? I love singing, and it really brings the spirit. Every hymn has such a beautiful message in it.
And it's interesting that that first really powerful experience with the Spirit
Was a hymn.
as a 7-year-old. I love it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Italy is an important part of your life and has been for a long time now. Can you just give us and our listeners a little bit of an overview or some bullet points of your touch points with Italy over the years? And then we can go back and maybe revisit some of those.
So my husband served his mission in the north part of Italy, first in the Milan mission for just a month or two. And then they split the mission, and then he served in Padua. And then we were married 26 years before we finally went to Italy. And my husband said, just be patient. We're not going to be tourists. We've got to go see these people that I have been away from for so long. And there were so many miracles in finding these people because he just had his little missionary journal. We found so many sweet people that he'd had such great experiences with. And, we always had Italian visitors here, and we opened up our home, and this one particular couple had come over, the De Roberti's family. So the De Roberti's family wanted to come over, and he brought over this beautiful portrait of Joseph Smith. He had drawn it himself, and he wanted to give it to President Hinckley. So by some luck, he knew Michael Ballum, who knew President Monson. And they went in and visited with him. And he said, would you please give this to President Hinckley? President Monson said, well, let's go see if he's in.
Oh, wow.
And he jumped up, went and checked, and he was in. And they gave him that portrait. And it's just beautiful. Well, shortly after that, we got a call from Elder Hell's office and said that he'd like to meet with us. And I could not imagine why.
That's got to be totally
Really
overwhelming.
Very. We're just small town kids. So we went up to meet with him, and he asked us all kinds of questions, and received a call a few months later from President Faust to be the mission leaders of the Italy-Rome mission. And when he called us, he said, usually we don't know where you're going to serve. We just call you, and then we work that out later. But with you, we know exactly where you're going to be, and you'll be serving in the Italy-Rome mission, which made both my husband and I gasp because just about a month or so before, he'd had this impression when he heard someone had just received a mission call, and they said the Italy-Rome mission. There was this very strong impression. It was overwhelming to him that he would be that young man's mission president.
Oh, my goodness.
And he thought, well, that's crazy. He didn't even tell me about it. And then he told me a little bit later during this process. And there were 3 missions we could have served in. And we were indeed in that mission where it was this young man.
Wow.
Where he was serving. So we went to Italy, and we took all of our children at first. Our 2 oldest were in college, so they were just there with us for a couple of months, and then they came back. So we had 4 children. It was a little overwhelming. It was quite overwhelming to have children there and try to do everything that we needed to do for the missionaries and be there for the people. But what the missionaries explained to us right away, I remember going to a baptism. We took the whole family, and here we are, 6 children walking into a little chapel. And they told us later, they said, you have no idea what you just being there with your big family did, because you don't get it, but there's this light, this aura around your family that just adds so much. So don't worry so much about the language. It's just the spirit that you have, and that was important. That was really sweet. But the people there are so loving and so kind, and they were so grateful that I would make the effort to learn the language. And I tried. It wasn't great. They had to really pay attention to catch what I was saying. But sometimes as I would be speaking, I'd be thinking, oh, I don't know that word. They would shout it out from the congregation. They're like trying to help you.
That's so sweet.
They were so sweet. They gave some of the best talks that I've ever heard. They were so faithful. Once an Italian actually makes the step to join the church, they are in, and they are faithful and sure. And I love that about them.
And now you went, was it 2007?
2007 to 2010. They announced the temple while we were there. That was really sweet. And then when we came home in July, we found out later that the groundbreaking would be in, I believe it was October of that year. And we decided to go back with a couple of our children. So we went with 3 of our daughters to the groundbreaking. And a really cute story, our daughter, Marianne, who lives there now in Italy, said to me, I'm going to go shake the prophet's hand. And it was just afterward, President Monson had just said, okay, everybody can come up and shovel. And the security's like, everybody's rushing the grounds. And my daughter said, I'm going to go shake his hand. And I was like, oh, okay, good luck, honey. I don't know if that's going to work out. And she said, well, don't you want to come and take a picture? And I said, oh, well, I'm visiting with these people. Maybe I'll come over in a minute. Anyway, she comes back after a few minutes and says, I got to shake his hand.
Oh my.
And I said, you did? Well, that was really a sweet thing. And then later, her picture was on the front of the church news. So we got the picture.
I love it.
And then later, my husband went over for the open house and helped with that. And then we both went for the dedication. And that was a really incredible experience. Like everyone was there. All of the apostles, the first presidency. We were up in one of the rooms above in the residence area and saw them all come out of the temple dressed in white and have their picture taken. It was a very sweet moment.
Well, what can you tell us about that temple site and what the saints there in Italy felt about that site prior to the temple being built?
One of the mission presidents had acquired that land for the church. There was an old villa that sat there. There was an olive grove that was there, quite a big parcel of land. They put missionaries there in the old villa. Sometimes they would have different church events there. And they did not know that it was for a temple, but all of the saints there called it the temple site, because they yearned and prayed and hoped and pleaded with the Lord to have a temple. And so there was no question in anybody's mind where that temple would go. And that is indeed where it went. There were a lot of miracles that happened. For example, whenever you develop land there in Italy, you have to dig these deep trenches through carefully so that you can see if there are any artifacts underneath. And there was nothing found. They had a fast during that time so that nothing would be found. And there was a really sweet experience. There was a district conference down in Napoli once, and the youth that, sometimes there's only 1 or 2 or maybe 3 in each branch. But they'd all come together and they were singing a song in state conference. And my husband and I leaned over and said, these kids need to be together more often. Let's do a little youth conference. So right on the stand, we figured out what would be a good day. And my husband invited them all to come to the mission home and have a youth conference. And so then we enlisted the help of the missionaries and some of the people, some of their leaders, and we did a lot of the logistics there. And I was going to do the cooking, and the boys were going to sleep out it was a gated area, so the boys were going to sleep out on the lawn and the girls inside. But I felt really strongly that we needed to do a service project. So I called around to try to find something. And then the missionaries said, oh, well, they're going to go be doing a stake service project on the temple site. Now, keep in mind, it's not been announced that it's the temple. So I called President DeFeo, who's now the area president over there in Europe. And I said, President DeFeo, he's the stake president at the time. And I said, I hear that there's going to be this service project there on this particular Saturday. But the missionaries have told me that it's only men who can come. Now, we've got all of these youth coming to the mission home. Can we bring them to help? And he said, absolutely. And bring a picnic with you, and you can have a picnic there. So we did. They did a lot of cleaning, and there was a lot going on, painting fences and getting old stuff out. And there had been a lot of vandalism in the villa. The missionaries had since moved out. So there was a lot of vandalism there. And so we needed to clean up a lot. And afterwards, we had this picnic. And then we had a testimony meeting, and that was the end of our youth conference. And it was so beautiful because these youth were sitting right where the temple is. And one of the men got up who served in Napoli. He was American. And he said, someday you will bring your children and your grandchildren on this property, and there will be a temple here. And you will be able to tell them about this day when you were able to serve and have that temple now in your life. It was amazing. And that's exactly what has happened. There's now a temple right there where they were having that beautiful testimony meeting. And those youth did not want to stop. They were very filled with the Spirit.
I love that story because there are so many steps that were miracles involved. You being on the stand, having that inspiration, and that story about digging the trenches.
Yeah.
And fasting, and then bringing the youth together, and the promise of that member.
And I feel like that's, how life is. There are just miracles around us everywhere, all the time. We can't take anything as a coincidence. I sometimes think there have been some really sweet missionary stories, both on our mission and before and after our mission, where I can see the hand of the Lord there. And I just imagine there are angels above us, just pulling all the strings, making sure that just the right things happen.
Are there other miracles related to the temple or experiences in your mission that you'd like to share?
When we went back for the groundbreaking during that October, it was very sweet to look over to the choir. Not very many people were invited to come. It was mostly leadership and their family, which was sad for me. I wish that more people could have been there. But I looked over into the choir, and the person who was leading the choir was a convert, Brother Giusti. His wife was in the choir. There was a homeless man who had been found and who was very musical, and the missionaries had brought him into the church. He was baptized, and the sweetest man, he would come over to the mission home a lot to wash his clothes, and I'd give him a haircut once in a while, and he'd play the piano. And he was very, very talented. And then later the ward helped him get into a home and helped him with some work. Just a great man. And there he was in the choir. To look over there and see these people who joined the church while we were there in the choir was really the highlight of the whole day. See that kind of full circle.
Yeah, that sounds tender.
Yeah.
To see those people that you loved being able to participate in that.
Mm-hmm.
How does your service in Italy during that time, serving as mission leaders, continue to bless your life?
I have heard from people, both who have served in Italy and those who have just observed those who served in Italy. They said, Italy's always part of you now. And it really is. Thank goodness for Facebook. We get to see what our missionaries are doing, and we get to connect. We've had 4 of our 6 children serve in Italy. 2 served in the north and 2 served in the south. 1 was in Catania until they combined the missions. And our youngest daughter was called to Rome. And so many of the Italians said, we wait for you. We're waiting for you. And we're so happy you're coming home. They really loved her. She was 11 when we went there. To have that connection with all of these family members was really precious. One of our daughters who did not serve in Italy actually served with us a year before her mission to Japan. She served a service mission with us. She was so good at the language. She's such a smart girl. This is our daughter, Lisa, and she would help the children with their homework. She served at their school, rode the bus with them, helped as a TA, did whatever they needed her to do. And she really did a wonderful mission there. So she can count that too. So we can count 5.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That can't be a coincidence that you've all been able to serve there.
It was really sweet. And while we were there, we had 3 of our children serving missions. 1 in northern Milan, 1 in southern Italy, which is Catania, and then 1 in Japan.
5 family missionaries all at once.
Yeah. But they said it was great because no one was homesick. They said there's no one home. So we're all out here doing the same thing together. So we're not homesick.
That is a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Fast forward to today, and you mentioned that you stay in touch through Facebook with people there and you're connected to them that way.
Yeah, we travel over once in a while. And I was really excited. I went over and visited our daughter, and there was a stake conference there. And so there were people that we knew. And one of the members that we knew is now in the presidency of the Swiss Temple, because in Switzerland, there's a big chunk of Switzerland that is Italian speaking. All their road signs and the language that is spoken is Italian there. The people in the northern part of Italy still go to that temple. And so he's one of the counselors there. And the Italians are very faithful, not just in the Rome temple, but in the Swiss temple as well. And now we serve at the Missionary Training Center. My husband's a branch president there, and I'm a branch missionary. And I saw a couple of our missionaries that have gone through our branch that were there serving, and that was really sweet to see them and reconnect with them. So there's always going to be a connection.
Karen, what have you learned about keeping covenants through your church service?
There's always a need for people to serve. And I've been so blessed to have different callings that have helped me not just keep my covenants, but remind me continually of my covenants. One calling that I've never wanted and have been very scared about having is to be a gospel doctrine teacher. So I came back from our mission and I was called to be a gospel doctrine teacher. And I sat in the bishop's office and cried. And he said, well, I didn't expect that. But I just thought, okay, Karen, you can do this. It's going to be okay. You've done really hard things, including speaking Italian at state conference and have it translated back to President Oaks. I don't think anything is more scary than that.
That sounds very intimidating.
It really was. But he was so sweet. He couldn't have been sweeter. And then said during a question answer session on Saturday night, if I don't know the answer, I'm sure that President and Sister Acerson have answers. So we'll let them answer some questions. And he did. So, there's really nothing scarier than that. So I thought, okay, I'll try and do gospel doctrine. But what a blessing. And I do remember teaching the older kids in Sunday school and had that calling before our mission for about 4 years. And it was such a blessing to be able to go through all of the Gospels as a teacher, because you learn more by being the teacher. And so being the teacher and learning more about Jesus Christ, more about the plan of salvation and the love that our Heavenly Father has for us was huge for preparing me for our mission. Being able to just say, oh, I know what will work just right in this talk or in this training at our zone conference or whatnot. And it really was beautiful. Everything that we learn in life can help when we need to have those talents and spirit and inspiration to serve in another capacity. It all just builds and builds. Now we are serving at the Missionary Training Center, and we've learned so much. Every week they trade between two topics. One is faith in Jesus Christ and his atoning sacrifice. And the other one is to know God's character and feel his love. And so those missionaries give talks, all of our lessons, and we give talks as well. We're speaking about every 3 or 4 weeks. And those are our topics. And there isn't anything more important than really diving in and learning more about our Savior and his atoning sacrifice and about God and his love for us. It really all boils down to that. We are so blessed to have these opportunities. And so I think I would just say to anybody listening, take whatever opportunity you have to serve, because you're going to be the one that's going to be blessed.
That's so true.
Honestly.
And I love how you said that you're still constantly learning and growing. And
constantly.
That is just one of the most beautiful things about the gospel, is that we're never really done, at least in this life. And there's so much to learn and grow and develop. And that's all preparatory for the next thing.
Absolutely. And age is a gift, because you get to look back and see those spots in your life that was hard or a struggle or when you weren't your best, and see what has come of it, and really understand finally the blessings of the gospel, and to really finally get it and say, wow, it really is all about family. It's not about this and this and this and this. It's really about family and how much better you can make someone else's life.
Earlier, you talked about when an Italian has the commitment to the gospel and they make that decision that they're all in. I think that's a great example of faith in Jesus Christ related to what you were just speaking about and sharing. That example of faith of the Italians and being fully committed to the gospel and covenant keepers once they make those covenants. I thought of that connected to your early life experience. And you talked about how the gospel brought you joy in your life. And you felt that as a child. You felt connected through listening to your mom sing and being close to her. And that helped you feel close to Jesus. And at this stage of your life, you have great things to look back on and you've experienced them. And you were in this place that's very central to the history of the world and to the life of Jesus Christ and the mission of his apostles. When President Nelson was there for the dedication, I love what he said. He called Rome a hinge point. And we all have individual hinge points in our lives. But he said that the dedication of the Rome, Italy temple is a hinge point in the history of the church. He said, things are going to move forward at an accelerated pace. The church is going to have an unprecedented future, unparalleled. We're just building up to what's ahead now. And I'm interested with you being at the Missionary Training Center now. How are you seeing that acceleration and that unparalleled momentum and growth in the church?
Missionary work is hard. It's hard in Italy. It's hard in a lot of places. It was cute. One of the missionaries, one of the sisters said, every talk we hear from these general authorities are like, this isn't just for now. This isn't just for your mission. This is for your whole life. These teachings, this path you're on, this dedication to the gospel and your testimony growth, it's not just for now. It's for your whole life.
There's something about that it's the invitation to have it be a hinge point in your personal life.
Yeah.
And that as individually, we choose to allow our conversion or our covenant keeping to be a hinge point that points us to Jesus.
You know, when you talk about that being a hinge point, it really is because here we are in Italy now with this beautiful temple. If you climb to the top of St. Peter's, you can see the temple. It's on the outskirts of Rome, still connected to the city, but it's in such a beautiful visual place with all of the visitors who come and people who come to see, and they're just amazed. It's a beautiful place. Now, having said that, I want to talk a little bit about my convert. She's really cute. She'll call me her missionary, as they do. And this is Francesca. She came to church with her then fiance, and he really wanted her. He said, I've kind of wandered a bit from the church, but I really want to be in the church. It's an important part of my life, and I know that it will bless our lives to raise our family in the church. And she said, I'll come with you, but don't ask me to be baptized because I'm a very faithful Catholic and I don't want to disappoint my parents. She'd served as a missionary in her church. And so she said, just don't pressure me. So she came, and of course the missionaries were all excited. But then she was so active, and her husband and another couple would have regular family home evenings and taught her the basic principles. And he was very good. Then they got married, by the way. So she was very active, and I would sit and watch sweet Francesca. She would just watch and listen carefully, and I could see that she was feeling the Spirit. Pretty soon, the missionaries didn't even realize she wasn't a member. She was just always there and always active and always serving. I think she even was in primary presidency. Well, I would tease her a little, and I would say, now, Francesca, and of course I would do what I could with teaching her and loving her. And I would say, now, Francesca, we only have 6 months left. And she'd just giggle and say, yeah, I know. And then I'd say, we only have a couple of months left. Yeah, I know. And of course, I was hinting that maybe she could get baptized before we leave. A few months before we came home, our daughter was finished with her mission in Milan and was going to come to our home for a couple of weeks before returning to Utah. And it was a very strong impression that our daughter, Kimberly, needed to teach Francesca. They were very much the same age. And I just felt this really strong impression. So after the closing prayer, I turned around. Francesca was sitting right behind me. And I said, Francesca, our daughter is coming home from her mission. And next week, I would love you and your husband to come over with this other couple. And we're going to have a missionary lesson. And she said, okay. So they did. I made it very clear what we were doing. And I said, we're going to have dinner. They came over and we had a beautiful lesson. And I remember my daughter saying, what does she need to learn? What is the sticking point here? And I said, I don't know, because I think she knows so much about the gospel. She's already been coming to church for a couple of years and she's been taught by her husband. And I said, I just feel like maybe she needs to be reminded about what the blessings of the gospel are. And she said, oh, okay. So we sat there in a circle at this lesson. And there were quite a few of us in there. And my daughter said, I just want everybody to kind of mention some of the blessings of the gospel in your life. So we went around the circle and it came to her and she started to cry. She knew what the blessings of the gospel were. She said several sweet things, and I knew that she knew that the gospel was true. And then fast forward to the week before we're leaving, and we're speaking on Sunday and we're leaving on that Thursday. So I gave Francesca a hug. We're both crying because we're saying goodbye to everybody and everybody's emotional. And I said, Francesca, we're leaving on Thursday. And if you would choose to be baptized, Tuesday or Wednesday would work out really well for us. And she just laughed and cried and laughed and cried. So then Monday night, the next night, the bishop called us and he said, I have someone in my office who wants to talk to you. And so he put her on the phone and we all cried. And she said, I'm going to be baptized on Wednesday. She was baptized by her husband. We actually had to finally close the curtain because they were hugging so much and crying. It was a beautiful gift that was given to me personally for the end of our mission, the day before it came home. Francesca and her husband came about a year later to be sealed in the Salt Lake Temple. And then when we went back with our family to visit the temple and to visit Italy, just a few months after it had been dedicated, we saw Francesca at church. And she said, my daughter has just turned 8 and she's getting baptized tonight. Will you come? Oh. Francesca and her husband knew a lot of people. They're a beautiful couple. Well, now they have 3 children. And she had invited the entire community. And here we are in this big, beautiful chapel where people could actually fit now. And they would not have been able to have this experience in one of their smaller chapels. Here they are being invited onto the temple grounds to go to the chapel that is on the temple grounds. They're attending this baptism. And there I was 8 years later with her daughter being baptized. It was so special. It just felt like I got to see a glimpse into eternity. And a lot of people were there and asking questions. And, I just look at that and I think Francesca's now a missionary. She will be the one to help introduce the church to her friends. So yes, having the temple there is huge, and helping people to understand about eternity and about the promises that our Heavenly Father has made to us because of the covenants that we can make in the temple that will lead us back to Him, that will help us to be clean, to enter the kingdom with Him.
Well, I love how you were there at that hinge point for Francesca to invite her to be baptized. And then what a sweet, tender mercy that you got to be there for that baptism. First, I just want to say, Karen, you're amazing. And I'm so grateful for what you've shared. I love listening to you and your experiences and your beautiful testimony and your faith in Jesus Christ. Your example of sacrificing in order to serve the Lord is inspiring to me.
It's been a joy. And like we tell our missionaries, you'll find that it turns out not to be a sacrifice at all. It turns out to be the biggest blessing in your life.
Our final question is, how would you encourage someone to arise with Christ?
Even just yesterday, we were talking in a devotional at the MTC, and there was a scripture that they talked about, and it's in Moses chapter 6, verse 34. He says, "Walk with me." And I've thought about that phrase, arise in Christ, be who he wants you to be, walk with him. I remember being a child thinking about Jesus Christ and what would Jesus do, and loving to learn stories of him in both the Book of Mormon and the New Testament. How sweet it has been to mature and realize that all of my mistakes can be covered by his atoning sacrifice, and how we can all have joy if we will just accept that atoning sacrifice and try to live better and to be more like our Savior and to serve as he would have us serve. To just kind of picture him as being on our team, being with him, walking with him, striving to be like him, eventually arising to be with him.
We are grateful that you joined us today. We would love to hear your stories about how you arise with Jesus Christ. You can find us on Instagram at arise.with.christ or email us at arisewithchrist.temples@gmail.com.